China-Japan row, because I think it reflects a lot of everything that you just laid out, Carl, and to an extent what you were talking about, KJ, throughout this program. So, as you may know, Japan has accused China of locking its radar, its J-15 radar, on Japanese aircraft. And this comes amid lots of tensions, not just between China and Japan over Takaichi's comments on Taiwan and her ongoing wishy-washiness around this that has um, greatly offended China, but also Donald Trump first calling Takaichi saying "cool it" some weeks ago, and then now it's being said that Japan is frustrated with Donald Trump for the administration's silence over this row. Japan is asking the U.S. to be more vocal in its support after Beijing has reacted furiously to her comments about Taiwan. So, KJ, why don't we start with you? What's your reaction to all of this? Because this is a row that is not going away, and it is becoming more and more tense, especially on the military front, and especially the diplomatic fronts. What's your take?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is Japan is a U.S. proxy. The Liberal Democratic Party of Japan exists only by virtue of being constructed by the United States. It was put together from the unrepentant militarists, the military industrialists, and organized crime. It was put together by the CIA, and they have held one-party control over Japanese politics for almost since the 1950s, except for an eight-month period, which was minor aberrations. They are one-party rule. They were put into power by the United States. They do the bidding of the United States. And Takaichi is the most extreme far-right fascist faction of the LDP. This is the Nippon Kaigi Seiwa faction that wants to remilitarize and reinstitute the Japanese monarchy, essentially the Japanese imperium, and to dominate Asia as they did prior to World War II. So inside that context, Japan is functioning as a U.S. subcontractor, an imperial subcontractor, a proxy for the United States. If it says anything, if it does anything, it is saying out loud what the United States is thinking. And so there has been this kind of overt row that has been brewing. China has sent very, very strong messages to Japan telling them to knock it off, and that if it has aggressive designs against China, which that statement that it would see a Taiwan contingency as a Japan contingency, that it would see that as a survival threatening situation. This is coded language. This is what Japan has always used when it goes to war, certainly against China. It used the same language, survival threatening situation, in 1894 when it took Taiwan. It used the same language in 1931 when it invaded northern China. It used the same language in 1937, used the same language in 1941. This is the language that it uses when it goes to war. And Shinzo Abe, who was the mentor to Sanae Takaichi, wrote into the Japanese legislature the 2015 law that says that survival threatening situation authorizes aggressive war. That is to say, he completely gutted Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which Japan is only supposed to engage in self-defense. This is the clause that allows expeditionary war. And Sanae Takaichi has connected that clause with war against China over Taiwan, which is China's sovereign territory. China doing sovereign things inside its sovereign territory is not a cause for Japan to get involved or to call it a survival threatening situation, which is what Takaichi did. And so China now is escalating, sending strong messages to Japan. Don't get involved in our internal affairs. Don't get involved in war of aggression against us, because the last time that happened, you got away with killing off 35 million Chinese. This time, it's not going to be so easy. So strong signals are being sent to China. And of course, Japan wants the United States to back it up, because this was a little bit of a gaffe. I don't think they wanted to show their cards so soon. But at the same time, the United States is facing a contradiction right now. The contradiction is that it absolutely needs Chinese supply chains. It absolutely needs Chinese rare earth elements in order to wage war against China. The Chinese are wise to this, but they don't want a near-death experience like they had, a few weeks ago with, for example, with Nexperia. And these supply chains, as I said, are irreplaceable, at least over the next few decades. And so the US doesn't want the dependency. It wants to decouple. It wants to nearshore, friendshore, reshore all these critical supply chains. But it can't do that yet. These are impossible tasks. The machinery and patents for rare earth elements are all Chinese. The US cannot reindustrialize to the degree necessary. And the US allies are also dependent on China for their own supply chain. So any friendshoring is actually the Chinese supply chain, which is being disguised as allies' work. So these contradictions are irresolvable. The US needs to make nice with China until it can resolve this irresolvable contradiction. And in the meantime, Sanae Takaichi has gotten too high on her high horse and kind of, let the cat out of the bag. And the US is not backing up Japan, even though it has plans to use Japan as its agent for war. That's why the US is preparing a joint command between Japan and the United States, just as it has a joint command between US and Korea. It wants Japan as a proxy. It wants empire on the cheap. It wants Japan to do its dirty work, but it's also slapping it down because it got a little bit too forward. And that is the Japanese militarist, imperialist, Nippon Kaigi faction speaking out of turn. It is supposed to be serving the table. It does not have a place on the table. And when it does, it gets slapped down.
Yeah, Takaichi is something else. I know you saw Carl, I'm sure, going around social media when she was speaking, I think, to Gulf investors and quoting anime, literally quoting anime, say Attack on Titan, which actually has heavy fascist references, honestly. Shut up and invest everything in me. But China is not happy. It doesn't even matter that Takaichi has said that she reaffirms the stance. In fact, China rejected this, and their foreign ministry spokesperson wants her to articulate what actually is stated in the 1972 Sino-Japanese joint statement. So, Carl, you are a history buff. How did it get here, and why is this getting so tense so quickly?
Well, first of all, it's totally unnecessary. Takaichi decided to poke the hornet's nest. She wanted to poke the bear, and I think Japan has, as KJ has pointed out, has been a U.S. client state. A frontier post in Western Pacific, but in a way, not dissimilar from the roles of countries in EU. They perform a similar role. Yet, when U.S. want to, at this point, U.S. interest is to offsource more of this imperial project to its vassals in Japan and EU. But at the same time, it wants to fix other issues like he considered more important, like laid out in the national security document, that he wants to fix its supply chain vulnerability vis-a-vis China. He wants to shore up its position in West Hemisphere, vis-a-vis Venezuela. So it has, from perspective of Japan and Europe, they see this as a pivoting away from their theater. And they are the ones that are going to left with holding the bag of confronting the big Russian bear or the angry Chinese dragon. So Takaichi, in essence, is doing this to intentionally stir up the hornet's nest, as a cry for help, to drag the United States back in. It's like, no. You cannot deprioritize us. You cannot deprioritize the Japan-U.S. security agreement. You got to be here to back us up versus China. But even though U.S. hasn't given up on the goal of containing China, it needs Japan to do that. As KJ pointed out, it didn't need Japan to be so forward at this particular juncture when U.S. is trying to, prioritizing other things of its imperial project. This is why, Donald Trump reportedly called Takaichi and tell her to cool it. And this is why Japan is angry. They're not getting the backing they were hoping for from the United States. Now, Takaichi did this also to shore up his own domestic standing in Japan, because he knows this will evoke intense criticism from China by stepping on China's reddest red line, and that could ricochet back to Japan to spark even upsurge of the Japanese nationalism, which then will boost his domestic standing as a politician who can be tough on China. We actually saw her popularity soar temporarily in Japan. This was part of the playbook, because Japan is facing serious economic headwind right now. The Japanese economy is quietly imploding. The bond interest rate has gone up. For decades, the Japanese central bank has printed tons of money to do the cash infusion to keep the Japanese economy afloat. But now, finally, the investors are rebelling. They're like, okay, if you continue to expect us to buy Japanese government debt, we need expect some return. So this is why the Japanese bond interest rate has been going up. This is going to have a huge ripple effect across Japan, but also going to spill over into the U.S. Asset market, because a lot of the Wall Street types have for decades been borrowing tons of Japanese yen to invest in higher yield asset in American stock market and bond market. And the unwinding of the yen carry trade is going to have serious whiplash effect. So Takaichi is facing, she is not fixing the flagging economy is hard. It's much easier to do grandstanding. This is the problem with a lot of the politicians in the so-called developed world. Rather than doing the hard work of fixing structural problems that can allow your economy to grow again, let's redirect the public attention. Let's stir up tension that will shore up our own public standing. We can do that as simple as making a provocative statement. And for decades that has worked, because China, they did not expect China to retaliate. They thought they could get this popularity boost for free, but China in 2025 is not China of yesterday. Now, China do have a lot of cards on the table. China could already, their immediate hit of Japanese economic sector is the tourism. Chinese tourists make up the largest group of tourists that come to Japan, and tourism is 7% of the Japanese economy. That took an immediate hit. And this is even before China to activate its grip on the rare earth supply chain yet. If China cuts off the rare earth supply chain to Japan, that will ground all the advanced manufacturing in Japan to a ground steel. Those are the things that China, if China chooses to, could exercise. This is why the Japanese government is now trying to backpedal. But still, they're using language that kind of, by saying, oh, Japan, because of the San Francisco Treaty, Japan is not in a position to decide on the status of Taiwan, which is completely bogus, because, the San Francisco Treaty was structured by the United States to explicitly exclude both governments of China, both the communist government and the KMT government, and also Korea. So Korea and China were excluded from the Treaty of San Francisco to settle World War II, and this had, whereas when Japan and China formally established normalized their tie in 1972, they both sides agree on the one China principle, which is that Taiwan is a part of China, and the only legitimate representative of all of China is the government in Beijing. This is the same principle that's underlying the Sino-American relationship, which the U.S. administration have been sabotaging in more recent years. But now, Takaichi made it more explicit by peeling away the strategic ambiguity on the question of Taiwan by saying Japan will militarily involve. I think she will have to eat some crow, because China is going to make sure they will have to suffer some consequences for this reckless action. From China's perspective, this is a wholly internal Chinese matter. Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan issue is to be resolved by Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. For Japan, a former colonial power who was deeply involved in carving Taiwan away from China to saying they're going to send military to Taiwan, this is totally unacceptable. This is why this role has deepened. Japan did this hoping U.S. will come to their to reaffirm their backing of Japan and to drag U.S. back to the to the front line in the Western Pacific. But so far they have failed. And because ultimately Japan is kind of stuck strategically, like EU, they have depending on US for security for so long, and they got very comfortable, and they profited from the post-war order by acting as deputy of the United States in their neighborhood. And now with the US decline, they have not fully made the adjustment. Japan at some point need to make we'll have to come to terms with the fact that they're in fact a East Asian nation, and to make peace with its neighbors, Korea and Japan, and rather to acting as the proxy of U.S. to keep the two other countries down.
Yeah, maybe stop drinking that long shui, that cold water. That would go a long way in embracing their fact that they're an East Asian nation. KJ, and both of you final comments on this. There's been, Carl, you pointed out a lot of Zionist entity Israeli outlets on X talking about how Japan is going to respond to China's transgressions with its military targeting of things like the Three Gorges Dam, and it's going to be an absolute disaster. I'm curious if you could comment on this, because obviously Japan, with 100 or some U.S. Military installations, as well as a renewed commitment to militarism, is obviously an important cog to this renewed and escalating Cold War on China. But KJ, what's your reaction to this, and anything else you want to add to it?
Yeah. First, I'll talk about Sanae Takaichi a little bit more. Sanae Takaichi poses a problem for the United States that all U.S. puppets pose. The U.S. installs these puppets, and it wants people who are stupid enough to follow U.S. dictates, but are smart enough to tactically produce the results that they want. Clearly, she is falling on the stupid end, like Kaja Kallas or Liz Truss. And so she's clearly shown herself to be incredibly foolish, incredibly, way out of her league. And also, you want people who are malleable, but if they're too malleable, they're not aggressive enough. And if they're too aggressive, then sometimes they become a loose cannon. So she falls into that loose cannon category. We've seen this throughout history with American puppets. Syngman Rhee, was a loose cannon. Zelensky is in that loose cannon category. Yoon Suk-yeol was loose cannon. And so Takaichi is also bordering into that loose cannon category. And so the question becomes, is she going to last, or how long is she going to last? And this is always the problem when you have quislings and proxies and puppets. The US always has this problem, and it has to figure out what to do with her. Is it going to cut her loose? Is it going to take her down? Is she going to be replaced? Or are they going to be able to reform her? So we'll see what happens. But my intuition is that she is not for long as the Prime Minister of Japan. I don't think she is going to last long. Certainly she's outlasted Liz Truss, but I think she is still on that same trajectory. Now, regarding Japan and is Japan going to respond? Well, once again, we have to highlight the fact that Japan is a US base, is, as they call it, an unsinkable aircraft carrier. It hosts probably 55,000 troops. There's some of the most powerful force projection platforms in Asia. It has about 70% of its bases on Okinawa, which is about 2% of the territory, but it hosts 70% of US bases. And the US, does atrocious things. Essentially, they run it as their own colony. And of course, there's this continual creep where they're militarizing Okinawa and the island chain closer and closer to Taiwan Island, placing very, very aggressive missiles and missile, defense systems on that island, Yonaguni, for example, and Iwakuni and all the other islands in that chain, closer and closer to China, which signals that they are thinking more and more aggressively about kinetic war. The staging is already happening. And so, it's understandable that, there are people on the left or on the right or on the fake left that are very, very excited that Japan is finally going to take some kind of kinetic measure against China. I don't think it's going to happen yet for the reasons that I've described earlier. Of course, the US wants the burden shifting. It wants the division labor. It wants the cost imposition. It wants Europe to spend 5% of GDP on military, and it wants Japan to move up to 2 and then 3 and then 4 and 5. And it wants all these forced alliances to do the bidding of the United States as proxies. In other words, the US wants empire with all the fixings on the cheap. So that is clearly the larger agenda, but it doesn't want to do it just yet because, as I pointed out, the US is in the process of building out a joint command with Japan, just as it has a joint command with South Korea. Joint command between the United States and another country means US command. Essentially, just as the US has OPCON over South Korean troops, it wants OPCON over Japanese troops. And that process is happening right now, but it's not complete yet. So they don't want Takaichi, and they don't want the Japanese to get too big for their britches and to shoot, to go off before the starting gun goes off. So they're going to pull this back a little bit. They still need to do more preparation. They still need to do more coordination, and they need to get Lee Jae-myung, the president of South Korea, back online. Yoon Suk-yeol was the perfect U.S. sycophant. He was doing everything that U.S. wanted. Yoon Suk-yeol is more of a maverick. He is his own man. He wants to wrest back operational control from the United States. He wants Korean troops back under Korean control and out of U.S. control. And so he's working hard for that. And so the Japan-U.S.-Korea alliance, JACUS, is facing stresses. And without that tight coordination between Japan, Korea, and the United States, any Pacific campaign is not going to be successful. So they want to keep Japan from shooting, it's shooting off prematurely, and they want to make sure that everything is properly controlled. And this is why they need to, rein Takaichi back in and have a more, measured and systemic escalation rather than, prematurely going off. That's the issue that they're facing right now.
Yeah, Carl, to you, your reactions and thoughts.
I just want to mention that I noticed there's a lot of Zionists, hardcore Zionists, posting really insane tweets to stir up hatred against the Chinese people and China. It's very obvious what they're trying to do. They're trying to distract people from what Israel is currently doing, carrying out an ongoing genocide, and they want to distract people from the influence of the Israeli lobbies, controlling those Western governments. It's like, oh, look over there, look at China. And it's I have to say, it's working. That's why they keep on doing it. But at some point, people got to wise up to this. For me, it was immediately obvious why they're doing this. But you're gonna see a lot more of these kind of internet crazy posts as times goes on, as China continued to rise and the West continued to decline. Only the only manufacturing only manufacturer of the that U.S. is going to lead China is in the manufacturing of the copium. But it is what it is. This is there's not going to be, despite all the rhetorics and the tensions, I don't expect a war in the Western Pacific, because if a war were to happen, it will devastate all the economies. All the economies of East Asia, China, Korea, Japan, etc. This is not in the interest of the people over here. Well, it might be in the interest of the United States, but for majority of the people that in East Asia, people still prefer to go on their business, and I don't see a much chance of a war breaking out. A war will only break out if U.S. really decide to press that button. But I don't think, like KJ pointed out, U.S. has realized at this particular juncture it's not able to do so because of serious resource constraints. So for the short term and intermediate terms, I'm still fairly optimistic about the prospect for peace in this region.
Gentlemen, KJ, Carl, anything else that you'd want to say before we begin to close out here? Is there anything that wasn't said?
Well, yeah, I certainly hope Carl is right. I tend to be always, and this is my orientation, I tend to be more pessimistic. I believe that war is being planned. I believe that this is simply the U.S. reloading and pausing to reload. I agree, the rare earth elements are a critical constraint. But what we have to do is we have to remember the national security strategy is the first of a raft of documents. So we have to watch out for what the national defense strategy says. That'll come out early 2026. And then we have to look at the nuclear posture review and the national military strategy. Keep an eye out for those documents, because they will tell you what is coming next, especially the nuclear posture review. Because as I have said over and over again, if the U.S. decides to go to war over Taiwan or with China, it is most certain to go nuclear. And we see the groundwork has been laid out for 10 years by Elbridge Colby and the neocons. And I think that we still have to be very, very careful. If it goes to war, it is going to be a nuclear war. And this is why everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel and prevent any escalation to war. And we have to also understand that this is no longer a first world problem. Activists, especially progressives on the left, are used to dealing with first world problems, labor issues, salary issues, things like that. These are much, much higher stakes. It requires a much higher level of commitment and action than I think people are actually aware of and ready to commit to. But they have to be aware of that. The stakes are extraordinarily high.
I agree with KJ that if a war to break out between U.S. and China, it will go nuclear. But this is because the U.S. has been eclipsed in conventional war capability in the Western Pacific by China. That's why there's a lot of think tanks are now coming up with crazy papers calling for deployment of tactical nuclear weapons and how U.S. can win the nuclear war against China, which is completely nuts. But China is not standing still. China continued to build up its own both conventional capability and nuclear strike capability. Pentagon estimate that China will likely reach about 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. So if it's a nuclear war, then all bets are off. We're all gonna die. So I don't think we should be worried about it. I don't think my bet is not on the nuclear war. My bet is still on people's sense of self-preservation, because I still believe most of the people in Washington, the Washington elite, they're a bunch of grifters. They're stirring up the tensions to continue to justify, to redirect resources, to line their own pockets, and so they can retire comfortably in the Bahamas. I don't think they are really looking forward to a to LARP fallout on U.S. mainland, because a lot of the assumptions in the past is that U.S. can inflict a lot of damage in Western Pacific, and the devastation that's going to be caused will cause in East Asia. You'll be cities of China, cities of Japan and Korea that will be devastated. But no, if worse goes nuclear, U.S. will be nuked too, and China is building their nuclear capability to make sure that they will have the capability to nuke U.S. from sea to shining sea. So this is why I'm still maintaining my optimistic stance that things are going to be okay.
I think, Carl, I hope you're right, but I'm afraid that they are not afraid of nuclear war. I don't believe that they're afraid of dying. I believe that they are already dead inside. And that's the thing that really scares me.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, we will have to keep a lookout for those oncoming documents, as well as keep track of the U.S. empire's, what it actually does versus what the Trump administration says. And of course, you two will be back on soon, likely, because all of this continues to move very, very fast. With that said, everybody, hit the like button before you go. I want to thank all the new members and all the super chats. Thank you so much for your generosity to this program. Make sure that I have Carl Zha's YouTube in the video description. You can find KJ all over the internet. He's been on programs like mine, but so many others, and you can find his articles everywhere online. Anything I'm forgetting before we go, Jen, both of you? Anything that you want to plug if there's something new going on? Carl, I know you do Silk and Steel podcast. I know that's on your YouTube, but you can also find it other places. Without further ado, then.
Check out my YouTube. Check out my Patreon, Silk and Steel podcast. Support my surfing habits on Bali. Thanks, everybody.
And I want to say, everybody, get out into the streets. This is a serious moment. We need to be making our voices heard for peace.
Yes, indeed, everyone. You heard them. All right, everyone, hit the like button before you go. That will push their voices further in YouTube's algorithm. All the places to support this channel, Patreon, Substack, and more are also in the video description. And until next time, everyone, I'll see you.